Today we're going to be talking a little bit about some heritage for a little bit. I've talked Lois into sharing some things from when she was a child, from the 30s and so forth. This book right here is the Little York Christian Church history from 1849 to 1931. And this was given to Marie Nichols, which a lot of us here are related to, which would be Bill and Roger and Carol. Maria would be their mother, be my aunt. And the one who put it together was Herman Gross. For those of you who remember Herman, he passed away last summer, was it? I think.
It's been longer than that.
2 years ago maybe. But he was very meticulous about keeping records, and the records that he had, he put them together in this book and binder. And I'm going to read a few segments from the beginning, which is 1849. I got about 5 pages here, short excerpts I'm going to read to. It's going to lead up to what Lois is going to share with. Okay, so just be patient. It's going to be very good, informative, and so forth. So the Church of Christ at Little York was organized the 6th day of December 1949. 1849. I do have a teacher beside of me. 1849. So, this is before the Civil War. I mean, to me, when I look at things like this, I stop and, rather than just a date, you try to place it with something. This is, 20 years before the Civil War, 15 years. The church was organized. This doesn't mean the building was built, but the church was organized. This is Saturday, December 21st, 1850. The church met at 11 o'clock, discoursed by Brother W. Hartley, after which the church went in an election for one elder and one deacon, at which time Brother Elijah Hahn was elected elder and Brother Joseph Lester was deacon. Brother Joseph Hagan and Joseph Cipher have been previously appointed as elders, and Brother William Davis as deacons. Now, after I get done reading some of these things, I want to give this back to Carol, and I'm sure anytime during the day, if you'd like to thumb through this, you can probably get with them and look at some of these. Saturday, July the 26th, 1851. The church met at 4 o'clock p.m., prayer by Brother J.M. Cyphers, business called for. Now, when they had church back then, it's not near the same we do it now. Okay? It says, case of Peter Tharp, charged with profane swearing and intoxication, and upon testimony of Brother Hagan, Davis, and others, it appeared to the satisfaction of the church that the accused was guilty of the charge, whereupon was excluded from the fellowship of the church. There wouldn't be many of us sitting here today if we still did that, would we? Not saying that you guys involved in any of those things I just described. Another case that day, it says, case of Martha, no last name, on charge of adultery. This case was notorious, and on the testimony of Brother Hagan also stated that the accused to be excluded from the church. All things being heard, it was ordered that she be excluded from this church. Case of Thomas Lester on the charge of swearing and intoxication. The accused acknowledged the charge and desired to be excluded upon the facts being established, as it was ordered that his name be erased from the church book. A lot different than it is today. Not saying this is totally wrong. We do need to hold each other accountable for such things too. The Church of Christ at Little York. Also notice it doesn't say the Christian Church, it says Church of Christ. They didn't know when they actually changed the name from Church of Christ to Christian Church. December 17th, 1873, the Church of Christ at Little York, Indiana. December 27th, 1873, met at 2 o'clock p.m. and was opened by prayer by Brother John Hartle. After which Sister Loretta B. Miranda sent by Elder A. Hubbard a confession for dancing on the 4th of July and asking that the church forgive her. On the motion, Sister Miranda was forgiven. We don't even think about such things now, do we? Okay, November 18th, 1883, the new church house being furnished by Brother J.T. Sweeney of Columbus was called on the third day third Lord's Day to dedicate the same. This was an eminent audience present. Brother Sweeney raised funds enough to pay all the indebtedness and employ a pastor for almost a year. This, I assume, is when the first building was built. Back here behind me are some memorabilia and some signs. There's, over to my left is a beam from the original church. I'm assuming this sign over here on my right is probably that original sign because it has that date on there from 1883. So you're welcome to look at some of these things. And also back there are some articles that Lois's mother, Bernice Hahn, saved over the years. Some of them, a newsletter from Phil back there. So we got some stuff from the 70s. But there's other articles back there, so feel free to look at some of those things that are back there. So it was established on November 18th, 1883, the first building. This one's for you, Lowell, wherever you're sitting at back there. This is the Treasurer's Report on February 20th, 1886. The report of Brother Frank Hahn on the finances of the church reported $12.90 in the treasury. Two more, then I'm going to turn it over to Lois. Sunday, May 7th, 1911, the big day at Sunday school, 104 present, collection of $1 and 1 penny. Brother Cross ordained Brother George Davis as elder. Here's my last one. This is going to lead us into what Lois has to say. This says 1929. The church met Sunday, March 23rd, 1929, and elected the following members as elders: Kenneth Ellis, Walter Craig, which would be my grandfather, some of us here, and Carl McCoskey. The following members as deacons: Harley Hahn, which is Lois's dad, and Avis Carlisle. Now I'm going to turn this over to Lois because this kind of leads into her.
And since you mentioned, can you hear me? George Davis, I remember him as a very old man when I was a child, and he still followed the custom of saying amen emphatically when the preacher made a point. That was beginning to be frowned upon. You didn't talk in church. I'm glad the amen custom has come back. Amen. Okay, Steve asked me to talk about some of my early memories of the church, so I'll start with my very first one. Riding to church in a horse-drawn buggy with my parents. There were hitching posts, fancy iron ornate hitching posts in the fence behind the church, and the trees in the fence row gave the horses shade. Later on, we had a Model T Ford Coupe, old at the time we bought it. Someone had painted it green, and we had to be careful because that green rubbed off on our clothes. Then we got a rusty Model T. I was 6 or 7 by then, and often on a Sunday after church, Mother would invite all the kids my age, a little older and a little younger, to come home with them for a meal and an afternoon of playing. It's amazing how many kids could get in that old Model T. The boys stood on the running boards holding on tight as we chugged slowly down the road. They could have walked faster. The church was just one great big building with a vestibule in the front. Its use was similar to the one we have now, except it was not very fancy. There was no frills then. There was a rope fastened to the wall, which was taken down and used to ring the bell at the required times. A closet on the south side of the vestibule hid a ladder which led up into the attic and on then up to the belfry. Everett Reynolds allowed us kids to climb up and look into the attic one time because he believed in kids knowing how things worked. I remember it being hot, dusty, full of wasps and mud daubers, and you could look up higher and see the bell in the belfry. There were boxes of old records or maybe just leftover Sunday school material because we never threw anything away, sitting haphazardly around, and they were probably still there when the church burned unless somebody had removed them. The pews were of the slat variety. Those out there are more comfortable than the ones we had, because the ones we had kind of had a curve to the seat and a curve to the back, and the slats were not that close together. They were very uncomfortable because the preachers preached long sermons then. No one was anxious to get home to watch a football game or NASCAR races on TV. Our first minister, Brother Friend, had wavy white hair, and his face got really red when he preached at the top of his voice. No sound system then. The preachers had to have really good lungs. We had church every other Sunday. The preacher lived in our parsonage, but we couldn't afford to pay them to preach every Sunday. So if they wanted to make a regular salary every week, they had to find an alternate church. Everett Reynolds preached at Driftwood in Jackson County. And for the Sunday evening service, sometimes some from Little York would go over to that service, and when it was at our church, some of them came over to Little York. Well, Everett told my dad once that when he saw some of his congregation from the other church in the audience, he knew he'd have to change his sermon that next time, because he could get by with preaching the same sermon twice when they didn't hear him. And no one missed Sunday night service. The church was lit by lamps on the wall. They were held by, I have a little trouble describing this, a mirror hung on the wall. There was a little post extended at a right angle from it with a ring, which is where the lamps sat. Now, I just accepted that as a child as the light, but now I realize someone had to take those lamps down every week, refill them with kerosene, and not the scented kind we buy today. Trim the wicks and polish the globes and get them ready for the next time they were needed. Any volunteers for that kind of job? So the lamps were placed between each window, a couple in the back, and I think 3 across the front to light the choir and the piano and the pulpit and the people that sat. Sometimes we had enough people in the choir that both sides were full, but not always. And let's see, there were 2 big chairs, one for the minister, and I think the Sunday school superintendent sat in the other one behind the pulpit. And the communion table was in the same place where it is today. As to seating, when we came into the church, the women went to the left side, the south side, and sat toward the front with the children, and the men sat toward the back on the north side. When class was, we had the song service, the Sunday school service was a song service, a prayer, and a responsive reading. I'm not sure I'm in the right order, but the responsive reading was from our lesson leaflets. And then the classes dismissed to the various corners of the church, the men and women staying where they were. In my first class, Mary Cyphers was the teacher, and she lined us kids up on the front pew next to the stove in the winter to keep us warm. And the early version of nursery, she kept us there all through church. She folded the leaflets to make little boats for us to play with to keep us amused, because no one brought toys or books other than the Bible to church. When Sunday school was over, the people that had classes up in the corners went back into the congregation, the teenagers making a beeline for the back seats on the north side. I think that sitting in the back seats, do the teenagers still do that? Not so much. Now we sit as families, but we didn't do that then. And gradually, that ended when the men's and women's classes gradually ended, because Clara Gross's teenage class was the nucleus of our present senior adult class. Some members are still alive, but not in good enough health to attend the service today. They went from teenage class to young married class and middle-aged, and finally, where we are today, senior adult class. And Perry has a name for us, and I don't remember what it is, so you'll have to ask him. But there's no promotion to another class on this earth for us. In the summertime, the younger classes, except for the littlest kids, went outside to have their classes. The front porch on the old parsonage with this heavy brick railing and the spirea bushes adding a further screening was a favorite spot. I began my career as a Sunday school teacher on that porch. I was assisting my mother, Bernice Hahn, and some of you remember her as your teacher. And for some reason, she decided to take a break, and they trusted me to take her place. It was a large class, 16 or 17 kids, and they behaved themselves probably because their parents had told them if they heard of any problem that they caused, there would be consequences when they got home, and in those days, consequences meant consequences. Some of those kids remind me today that I was their teacher. They're not kids anymore. They were only 7 or 8 years younger than me, actually. So I spent 3 years teaching them. In 1947, my mother decided to take the class back. By that time, they were considered an older class. And on June the 29th, in 1947, in the front parlor in the old parsonage, Duke and I were married, and we moved to Indianapolis and lived there for the next 50 or so years. So it started me off good. I taught Sunday school in the church where I attended for many years, and I've always enjoyed doing it, and I'm still enjoying doing it. Many happy things happened in that old parsonage, but one I remember especially was when Reynoldses were here. Morris and Arlene, we were all of an age, and they had a bunch of us kids come and stay at midnight, on New Year's Eve till midnight, which was a big deal to get to stay up that late. And we took a flashlight and went over to the church, and on the stroke of midnight, we rang the bell. We beat the Methodist church by about 2 ding-dongs. Now, when you live on a farm, animals have a way of getting out on Sunday morning and finding their way into the garden. So every once in a while, June and I would be told to walk on ahead. Mom and Dad would be a little late. I think the devil had a hand in it. So off we'd go, carrying our white Sunday shoes and a pair of socks. And just before we got to church, we put our shoes and socks on because they would have been brown walking on the gravel roads. Never mind that our feet were pretty brown by then. We always carried our offering, 2 or 3 pennies, in our handkerchief, knotted in the corner, and those things made a formidable weapon if we needed it. The church bell rang about 15 minutes before Sunday school was to start, and then when Sunday school started, and again for church. Now, the Methodists were on a slightly earlier schedule than we were, so we would hear their bell first, which had a higher ring than ours did, and we'd know we'd better hurry if we hadn't headed out yet. So okay, and I'm talking about how we dressed. We're talking about the hanky. Every little girl and every woman carried a pretty flowered hanky. We had a Sunday dress for summer and a Sunday dress for winter. And the men all wore suits, spotless white shirts, and neckties. In the 30s, some of the younger men dressed a little more casually in the summer, wearing white duck trousers, they called them ice cream pants, with a shirt and tie and a straw caddy. Oh, they looked really sharp. And the kids, of course, the adults could wear the same clothes for several years. And some of the older women in the congregation sure did. They had hats that were so out of style, it was almost funny, except we didn't dare laugh. but they were still good hats. So they wore them. And and going back to the pennies for the offering, well, Steve here talked about how the amount they had in their treasury. Now, this was the Depression years, and I can remember my uncle, Merle McCoskey, counting out rolls of pennies to take to the bank. There would be a few larger coins and maybe a dollar bill in there or two, but that was it. And it may have, I imagine the church offering might have been a little more, and that may have been a combination of the two, because a trip to the bank took time, and why should two people go when one could do it just as well? So Merle would count out the money and record it and put it in a tin lard bucket and set it on top of the three-corner cupboard in Grandma's kitchen until he had time to go to the bank. And that's how our money was taken care of. Now, birthday offerings were very special. On the Sunday closest to our birthday, we gave money according to the amount of our age. Some of you remember that. That custom has died out just not too long ago. And it was announced in Sunday school. 10 cents birthday offering by Lois Carroll Hahn. And everyone knew how old I was. And that was in 1938. If you can do the math, you can figure out my age now. Now, the Ladies' Aid was a very important part of the church. They quilted for themselves, and they quilted for other people, earning money. I think they charged by the spool. They also served food to various activities that were held in the Little York area. I can remember when the new community building was built, the Farm Institute was held there. And Mother gave me a dime so I could go over to the church and eat lunch from school. And the prices were a small bowl of soup for a nickel and a glass of milk for a nickel. Now, I knew what that cost, but I'm guessing at the others. But the larger bowl of soup, I think, was 10 cents, and coffee was 5 cents. Sandwiches were 15, and they were probably bologna from Mayfield's store because there was no way to cook sandwiches. They kept the soup and the coffee hot on the pot-bellied stoves that were up in the front of the church to keep the church warm, but they didn't have a place to fry sandwiches, so it was probably bologna sandwiches from Mayfield's store. They were 15 cents, and a piece of pie was probably about the same. So that was done. They would push the pews up to the front of the church, set up tables for people to sit out with pews, some of the pews as benches, and feed everybody that came in to eat that day that had been at the Farm Institute, and anyone else in town that wanted a nice hot meal of good, rich vegetable soup and whatever else they could afford to buy that went with it. Before the basement was put in, the meetings were held in various homes. Now, this required a lot of flurry of house cleaning and rearranging because the living room had to accommodate the quilting frame and enough chairs for all the members to sit. We kept goats, and Billy, our old goat, was a rather rank old gentleman, and he was tied down behind the barn. And one year the breeze came from the west, and I remember Mother saying, "That goat has got to go." So I'll never forget seeing Billy hitched firmly to the tractor, his 4 hooves making grooves in the driveway as Dad pulled him along. By the time they reached the road, he had given up, and he trotted meekly behind, going down to the bottoms to be tied to a tree until the Ladies' Aid meeting was over. And I'm sure he munched happily on all those new greens he was among. And one time, Dad forgot and cleaned out the chicken house and spread it on the front lawn, feathers and all. And Mother was provoked. She never got angry, she just got provoked. Now, the Little York Sunday School picnic and homecoming, that was the high social event of the year. It's been described by many people, and so a lot of the things that went on there, you probably already know about from reading it from other places. So I'll just concentrate on what I remember as a child. At 10 o'clock in the morning, from our house, we could hear the sheepskin band start playing. And we knew then that the picnic was on the way, and Dad would soon be home from helping set up the slat pews. They hauled them over from the church, and they took the piano from the church and put it on the speaker stand and the pews in front of the stand. And someone draped the speaker stand with red, white, and blue bunting so it looked very festive. The pop stand and the ice cream stand and the sandwich stand were all made ready. And Dad would come home and we would be ready in our new picnic dresses Mother had sewed on her treadle sewing machine. And we would head for the picnic, and the excitement would grow as we neared the grove. On rainy days, they had a team of horses ready to pull the cars through the muddy part of the lane into the grove. And we always had to go see the team of oxen that some man brought there. He brought them every year, and they just stood patiently under a tree. They never did anything. He just brought them to show, and they were big. So the main things I remember about the picnic as a child is lots of people and speeches and music and Cracker Jacks with the prize in the box, pop, ice cream, and balloons. And the balloons had a way of getting away and lodging in the tree branches. After the picnic was over and the pews and the piano and everything was moved back to the church, and the grove was cleaned up, the young men would take their squirrel rifles and go shoot the balloons out of the trees. Now the congregation had a pitch-in dinner on tables back of the speaker stand. The speaker of the day and other dignitaries were our honored guests. And I remember one year, the speaker, a candidate for governor, didn't wait for the blessing. He just grabbed a plate and started piling the food on. And there were many disapproving looks, and I think he lost a lot of votes that day. He didn't get elected, and I don't remember what party he was from. It was a homecoming. People came from all over the country to come home. Now, from here I can't see, but I think there may be some people here who have come back to this congregation for this special day, and so maybe we have another Little York Sunday School homecoming. And now, in the what goes around comes around category, we've enjoyed what I call the traveling revival the last 3 years, with a number of congregations and mingling with each other. And this summer, the Collide services on the first Sunday of each month have been very successful, and several congregations have come together. In my mother's journal, dated May 31st, 1931, at Brother Friend's suggestion, all the churches in the county met at our church today for the first in a series of Fifth Sunday all-day meetings. It was a success. All the ministers present voted to continue it, and the next meeting will be held at the Blue River Church, which celebrated its 100th anniversary in 1919. Later in the year, on October 1st, she recorded this. We went yesterday with Carl and Ruth to the old Blue River Church for the Fifth Sunday meeting. Enjoyed the trip, the sermon, and the contact with friendly strangers, and the scenery. Now, this continued, as far as I know, clear up to World War II. I remember one of the last ones we had. It was in a hot summer day. It was held at Mount Eden. Pre-World War II, it may have been in summer of 41, it may have been before that. For the afternoon session, Peggy Craig, Steve's mother, Barbara Jean Fallbush, and I hurried in for the afternoon session to get a seat in a pew by the open window. And we were 3 skinny little girls, not much bigger than Hannah. Well, as the people filed in, one very substantial lady from the Mount Eden congregation sat on the other end of our pew, and those pews were a little warped, homemade, I think, and they lifted us right up off the ground. And we giggled for 20 minutes. You can't shut girls, I mean, we choke giggles. You can't shut little girls up when they start giggling. Let's see, I went too far here. Okay. This is my last thing, and it's stuck, and I can't get it. And I want to be sure I say it right. We also had Union Easter services. They continued till 1947. They were our church, the Methodist Church, the Mount Carmel EUB Church, and Mount Eden, and we took turns hosting the Easter service. I remember going to class in the Methodist Church, probably when I was first old enough to be in a class, and I liked their lesson card because their lessons came on a little card the size of a playing card. There was a religious picture and the scripture, and I remember thinking the kids that went there every Sunday would soon have a whole deck of cards. But times change, and people don't. We will always need the closeness of worshiping God as His family. And we enjoy the fellowship and the food and visiting, and today we are doing just that. That's it.
I'll give you just a few minutes if anybody's got a question that you'd like to ask her. Just raise your hand, you'll be recognized if you got something you'd like to ask her.
I got something I'd like to tell.
Okay.
I jumped off the porch when Arlene Reynolds had a birthday party. Lois was probably there too. I jumped off the porch and sprained my ankle, and my brother came and pulled me home in a little wagon.
Yeah, we did a lot of things on that porch. That was a very, very nice place, and when they took the railing off, it just changed the parsonage. Steve mentioned something about not knowing when the church started calling ourselves a Christian church, and I'm not sure about this, but I remember my dad telling me that when the Disciples of Christ organized, all of the Christian church congregations were asked either to join them or decide not to. But if we didn't decide not to, we became a part of the Disciples of Christ. Well, Little York voted to stay independent, and they changed their name at that time to the Christian Church. And now, I don't know whether that was just, Dad told me that, so he probably knew.
Okay.